Welcome back to Forbidden Knowledge News. I'm your host, Chris Matthew. Tonight I want to welcome Joshua P. Warren. At the age of 13, he wrote his first published book. Since then, he has published dozens more, including the regional bestseller Haunted Asheville, Simon & Schuster's How to Hunt Ghosts, and his 2015 bestseller Use the Force, A Jedi's Guide to the Law of Attraction. He's the president of a multimedia production company, Shadowbox Enterprises, LLC, and his articles have been published internationally. He has appeared on the National Geographic Channel, History Channel, Discovery, Travel Channel, Sci-Fi, Animal Planet, TLC, and numerous network affiliates of NPR, ABC, NBC, and CBS. He is also an international award-winning filmmaker, including Hollywood.com's Top Underground Filmmaker of 1998. As founder of the Wishing Machine Project, he has helped thousands of people around the world manifest their goals using radionics and mind-body environment relationship. Joshua, welcome. How you doing tonight?
I'm doing great, Chris. Thank you so much for having me on your show.
Well, thanks so much, man. I'm looking forward to this. I was actually trying to get you on for a while. I don't know if I was using the wrong email or something, but I'm so excited. Some of my favorite guests are those that are of the mindset that whether you're dealing with ghosts, aliens, psychic abilities, magical practices, there's somehow some profound connection between these phenomenon. And me, myself, I've recently had one of my first contact experiences ever. I've always been interested in the phenomenon. I've been doing this show for years, and I've never had my own real paranormal experience until recently, and it gives me a whole new insight into the phenomenon. And for each show, you know, it feels good to have like an insight into someone who's actually had an experience, because it's completely different once you've experienced yourself than trying to understand something that someone else's account of something. So I'd like to start out tonight with what first got you started interested in this? What got you down this path?
Well, you know, I was born and raised in the mountains of Asheville, North Carolina, the Blue Ridge Mountains. And my family on both sides have been in that area since the late 1700s, so for hundreds of years. And so I grew up in a place that was very rich with a lot of old pioneer folklore, Native American tales, a lot of haunted places. I mean, I was about an hour down the road from the site of what they call the Brown Mountain Lights, which are these mysterious balls of light that appear floating on and around this ridge at night. And to this day, no one has been able to explain for certain what they are. Some people said they were spirits. Others said they were UFOs. Some people said they were portals to other dimensions. And so I grew up in a place that was kind of rich with that tradition. Not to mention the fact that where I grew up is aligned with a lot of paranormal phenomena. You've got Brown Mountain there in the western part of the state. If you draw a line east, in the middle of North Carolina, you have a place called the Devil's Tramping Ground, which is this big barren spot of earth where nothing will grow. And they say the devil walks around at night mulling over what he's going to do to humankind to punish them. And then you finally hit the coast of North Carolina, and that's where we have the first attempt at an English settlement, and they all disappeared. It's known as the Lost Colony. And you continue drawing that line out, and you finally hit the island of Bermuda, which is the top point of the so-called Bermuda Triangle. And so I was very familiar with these strange things. A lot of bizarre stuff happened in my own family over the years. I had a great uncle, for example, who was photographed in the 1930s. When the photograph developed, he was missing a head. Nobody could explain how that happened. And 1 month later, on a July afternoon, 1936, he was having a conversation through an open window with his father while his father was fixing them lunch. And his father went out to deliver the lunch, and he was gone. That was my great uncle, Claude Calloway. He had vanished right in mid-sentence. His magazine was still there on the porch, and he was never seen or heard from again. He was in his early 20s, and it just seemed like he'd been abducted or raptured away or whatever, and this was a big tragedy in my family. Obviously, this is long before I was born, but they never had closure, and it was always this big mystery. Well, what the heck happened to Claude? And so I was curious about this stuff. I accepted the paranormal and the mysterious as a part of reality. And so as a teenager, I started writing scary short stories and poems that actually got published. By the time I was 15, I got a job working for the largest newspaper in the region, the Asheville Citizen-Times. And that gave me a lot of research that I turned into the book Haunted Asheville, which I published at the age of 18, which was the first book of Asheville ghost stories. And that became a big hit, got a lot of attention. I started getting invitations to do a lot of TV programs. And yet at that time, I still had never seen a ghost. I continued going to haunted places and doing research for years. And I was, I think, 23 years old before I ever finally saw a ghost. And, that was a life-altering experience for me. And since then, I have continued to investigate ghosts, and I found they connect with UFOs and psychic phenomena and cryptids and angels and demons and all these things that people talk about and use as descriptions. And I've found that basically, if you keep looking long enough, you will have experiences, but they don't happen as often as you might be led to believe by watching TV.
Right. It's like this hidden part of our reality that exists at all times. You just beyond the spectrum of our vision or something like that.
Well, sure. And, the funny thing is we call it paranormal because it doesn't happen that often. And that's why I think a lot of people are misled by the TV programs. And trust me, I mean, I've been on, as you mentioned, all the different TV shows, and I'm happy to do that. But there's a big difference between real research and entertainment. And what I mean in particular is that over the years, and I've been investigating this stuff professionally now for, 25, 30 years, something like, I can't remember exactly how long. But what happens is in that period of time, if you're really fortunate and you're out there constantly, you may see something that's truly profoundly paranormal once or twice a year. And so when you have a television show and you basically have to deliver a product on a weekly basis to get your paycheck, people go out and they exaggerate thought. And so a lot of people might watch some of the TV programs and say, well, come on, there's a more reasonable explanation for this. It's not some horrible demon growling. It's the guy's stomach growling or whatever, And so what I found is that it's easy to dismiss the paranormal if you're just looking at the entertainment side of it. When you start investigating it the way I have, and of course I've done my best to use a scientific approach. I use Occam's razor. I rule out the most obvious common explanations first. When you use that approach, what you find is that you can explain over 90% of the things that people don't understand. But it's that less than 10% that is that's the window into the other dimensions, into the unseen world around us. And it's fascinating to think that we are so egocentric that we are only aware through our physical senses of this tiny slice of what is available to quote unquote see or hear or feel. And so we have to open our minds and say, look, we are not the dominant species in the universe. We have all these other creatures that are inferior, so to speak, to humans. Right now, a rat or a squirrel would not understand the conversation we're having. So there are other things out there which are bigger than people, and we can't grasp exactly what they are, but we do come into contact with them and these forces from time to time.
Now, earlier you mentioned that you didn't have your first encounter till you were a little bit older in your 20s. Could you talk about that encounter, what happened?
Absolutely. Over the years, I always prided myself on being a good investigator and telling a good account of what happened, interviewing people. And of course, when it comes to a lot of the paranormal, it's mainly based upon people's experiences. I mean, how do you know a place is haunted if somebody doesn't come out and say, hey, I saw a ghost here? You're relying on people to throw out the alert. And so I always did a good job of documenting things. but I would show up to these places and I never saw a ghost myself. And so I got to the point where I thought maybe some people are capable of seeing ghosts and others are not. Maybe it takes a certain combination of rods and cones in your eyes, or maybe there are certain parts of the synapses that have to fire in a particular pattern in the brain. You know, I'm coming up with all these possibilities for why I wasn't able to see ghosts. And then all that changed when I was contacted by a young woman who was a college student in Asheville who had just moved into a small old house. And she, of course, moved in by herself. And as she was moving in, she saw what she thought was an intruder, some type of a form of a man that was in her house. And so this scared her, and she ran out and she called 911. And the cops came, and they found no evidence that anybody was there. And as time went on, she started getting glimpses of what she thought was a person around, and it started freaking her out quite a bit. And she was, of course, was telling all of her girlfriends, and so they were coming over to the house, and they started seeing this thing, which often would appear as kind of a cloudy or misty form, and they started taking pictures all around the house. And these are some of the most impressive pictures I've ever seen of a paranormal manifestation. I mean, these big, like, wispy forms sweeping through the house, sometimes sweeping through individuals. And, you know, I've spent many, many years, and you mentioned I have even won awards in filmmaking and TV production. I was in a production just last year that won an Emmy. And so I have a lot of different cameras, and I'm always testing them out. And I'm out there and I am taking stills and video and everything you can imagine, infrared, ultraviolet, of dust, of rain, of snow, of, you know, every type of typical thing, you know, fog, everything that would create some type of an impression of something paranormal that's not paranormal. I was looking at her pictures and I could not figure out what was causing these big phantasmal forms. And so I said, well, let me come to your house and I'll just take some measurements. So I have a bunch of gear. You know, I'm a geek. I love the gear. I have warehouses full of gear, everything. I even invent gear. I have brand new stuff that only I have that I use. And so I went to her house, and I started scanning the entire environment. Were you going to say something?
Oh, no.
Are you there?
No, I didn't say anything.
Okay. I thought I heard your voice. Maybe we got a little EVP pop in there. So anyway, as I'm scanning her house with various instruments, and I started getting these very bizarre burst of electromagnetic energy, and I couldn't explain where they were coming from. And I did find that there were some odd electrostatic fields that would sometimes rove around, but I didn't see anything. So she was so convincing, though, that there was something there, that I kept up with her. And one night she woke up, and this thing was, well, this misty form was in the bed with her. And that's when she'd had enough. And she left the house, and she said, I am not going back into this house. I'm going to have to sell this place or whatever unless something can be done to get rid of this thing. So I told her that I was not a ghost buster per se. I'm not an exorcist. I've never claimed that I can get rid of a ghost. I just study it. And so I went into her house, and I was taking measurements on a second occasion. And at one point, I was up in the attic with another researcher. His name was Rob. And I just so happened to be in the attic. I was going all over the house. And she had a pretty good-sized attic. And Rob said, Josh, look. And I turned, and he and I were about 3 feet apart. And right there between us was this big, blue-gray, misty form just hovering and swirling in the air right there between the two of us. And so, at it from one angle, I'm seeing it from the other. We're both absolutely mesmerized. Okay, there was no like shock of fear, no adrenaline. It was just like total confusion. We're looking at this thing, and my mind was just going through the filing cabinet. Like, there has to be a logical explanation for what I'm seeing. There has to be a logical. And I reached out and touched it. And when I touched it, It felt icy cold in the middle. It made the hair on my knuckles stand up, electrostatically speaking. And it kind of, the surface of it, and I always have difficulty trying to explain this, but being that close to it, the surface of it had these kind of little facets that would sort of shift around. They're almost like fluid geometric facets that would kind of slide and slip around. It was very, very weird. So I'm touching it from one side. Rob's touching it from the other side. So we're both touching this thing. And then it started to get dimmer and dimmer, and this is over the course of 30 to 60 seconds, which is quite a long time. And that's when I realized, oh man, I have a camera around my neck. You know, this whole time I had a camera. And so I was able to snap a shot of this thing just before it completely disappeared. If anybody wants to see that picture and many others, if you go to joshuapwarren.com, of course, I have a bunch of stuff on my website, but there's a section there called let's see, I've had 2 or 3 sections on my website. I'm not sure where I have that one filed. Let me check real quick.
That has to be amazing, though. I mean, I know, for me, I was dumbfounded with my contact experience, and having seen that as your first experience had to have been something that changed your life, basically.
Oh, it did. So that section that picture is filed under is called Gallery of the Strange. You'll see on my homepage there's a bunch of different stuff. There's TV and books and curiosity shop, and it's kind of cluttered. But when you go there and you see this image, I mean, you can imagine how sort of impressed I was that she had been telling me what she and all her friends were seeing. And here I was in a situation where I got to see it. Another person got to see it from another angle. We both got to touch it, and I was able to get a picture of it. Now, short of having the Ghostbusters trap that I can kick out there to suck the ghost in and release it in my museum, I don't know what else I could have done at that point in order to prove that there was a real ghostly phenomenon. And I cannot say to you of a dead person, but ghosts don't necessarily have to be spirits of once living things. As a matter of fact, some of the most prominent ghosts are ghosts of inanimate objects, like ghost ships or stagecoaches, that kind of thing. Or, that may also account for why ghosts don't show up naked. I mean, they're wearing clothes, which are inanimate objects in many cases. There are some naked ghosts, but that's a different story. And so I was really impressed. I told her, I said, okay, we saw it. And it was just like, such a big, huge relief for her to have that sort of validation that's, she's not crazy, that these other guys came in and saw this thing and documented it. And but again, I was frustrated because now that I know this is real, it's like now I want to document it even more. I got to get even more serious about trying to capture these things that are happening. And in terms of that particular case, I did end up hooking her up with a minister who specialized in clearing places, and he went there and did a ritual. And after that, she had no activity for about 6 months, and then after that, she said that there were some occasions where some spooky things still happened, but nothing like before. So to this day, she still lives in that house. But that was what I really needed to completely whet my appetite. And I have gone nonstop. I've been self-employed since I was 18 years old, going out and just professionally traveling the world and investigating all of these things, because I found, as you mentioned, that if you look to, say, I love that quote by the great researcher Charles Fort, you can measure a circle beginning anywhere. And no matter what avenue takes you into the world of the paranormal, whether you get into it through ghosts like I did, or you get into it through UFOs or cryptids or psychic phenomena, whatever doorway you enter, if you are serious enough, if you stick with it long enough, you will eventually find that they all do connect. They have a common overlap to some degree. And we can get more into that if you'd like, but the key component that they all have in common is time and the manipulation of time and therefore space. That's what they all have in common.
Well, I was going to get into that a little bit later, but now that you've mentioned that, I'm kind of interested into getting a little bit further into that right now.
Okay, so I've really been interested in how that, time and time warping is something that makes the imagination fire. It inspires all kinds of creative people and science fiction enthusiasts, and yet some of our most esteemed scientists say, look, time is an illusion. It is a flexible thing, that one's perception of past, present, and future depends solely upon that particular observer's position, that all time, supposedly, past, present, and future, is more or less happening at once. And we are just experiencing it moment by moment because that's all that our brains are capable of processing. And, of course, they say they have the math to prove it. I doubt either one of us could understand the equations, but they feel rather confident about it. And so, on one hand, that it may seem a little bit disappointing to believe that, because then you may think, well, okay, well, if everything is happening at once, then that suggests that everything is predetermined, that you have no choice, no free will, so what's the point in trying? But there may be another option here, which is perhaps there are multiple timelines, and each timeline is predetermined, but the joy of being a conscious individual is that you're able to sometimes switch from one timeline to another, what we think of as make a choice, and that gives us the ability to experience all these different outcomes. But that said, the mind is kind of like a little time machine. So when you're thinking about what you had for breakfast yesterday, you're mentally traveling back in time. If you're about to cross the street and you're trying to figure out whether or not it's safe to go because you're gauging how fast the automobiles are that are traveling left and right, you're envisioning possible future scenarios and trying to avoid the one in which you are splattered all over the pavement. And so it's a form of looking into possible future scenarios. So that said, let's apply this to the experience of encountering something paranormal. Well, let's start with ghosts. Most of the time, when someone sees a ghost, they are seeing something from the past. They are seeing a person as he or she once existed. That person is now dead and rotting in the grave. And yet, when you see that person, you see that person as that person was in the past. Also, there are ghosts of the future. And I wrote about this in my book, How to Hunt Ghosts, which these are sometimes spirits that come back and literally say, I'm from the future and I'm here to warn you, like some kind of a harbinger of something bad that may happen so you can avoid it. So it's easy to see time with ghosts. Sometimes people look back and instead of seeing a ghost, they see the ghost of an entire town or a whole scene with trees and houses and horses and wagons. And, sometimes it's like a time slip. So it's a ghostly experience on a grand scale. Now, when it comes to, say, UFOs, well, obviously a lot of people encounter or talk about having missing time when they encounter a UFO. But even more blatantly than that, you have, the scenario like was sort of portrayed in Close Encounters of the Third Kind. You have these stories about, the guy in Texas who's driving down a dark road at 10 p.m. on a Wednesday night, and all of a sudden here there is this gigantic saucer hovering over the road, and his truck stops working. Now he's sitting there and he is seeing this thing floating, but the truck stops working. And then the saucer flies away and the truck starts working again. He doesn't have to turn the ignition. It's not like it killed the engine on the car and then or the truck and he had to start it up again. No, it's like it paused that machine. And then when it flew away, it unpaused it. And in fact, if you think of it that way, you could say that maybe the reason the guy is able to maintain consciousness is because, like I say, he's different than the truck. His brain is its own little independent time machine, which is affected in a different way. There are also all kinds of examples of time warps, which is, I discovered a time warp here on my way to Area 51, which we can get into that if you'd like at some point. But basically, there's an old scene from one of the X-Files where, a flying saucer comes over an area and flies away, and later, I think it's Mulder or whatever, takes two stopwatches and he syncs them up, and he takes one to the site where the UFO was seen, and then when he brings it back and compares it, they're out of sync. So, but you have that sort of situation reported in the real world, where people say when a UFO shows up, it throws off the time a little bit. So whatever technology these UFOs are using or taking advantage of seems to possibly warp time and space. So there you have it clearly in that component. When it comes to cryptids, how many times do we have these stories where people say, I saw Bigfoot, and then all of a sudden he disappeared, and I ran over and I saw his footprints going down the trail, and then all of a sudden they just stopped. Where did he go? Where did this 8-foot tall, 1,000-pound creature go all of a sudden? Well, it seems like that if we are to believe these stories, that the only explanation is that somehow Bigfoot changed his point in space. And since space and time are two ends of the same coin, now we have time in there again. When it comes to psychic phenomena, it's no different. People are talking about precognition or postcognition, seeing into the past, seeing into the future. It's always time being warped and manipulated in some way. And it may be that the most grand example of all this is what people nowadays like to call the Mandela effect, meaning that it's possible somewhere out there, somebody in the future is playing with the timelines, and we see little nuanced changes in the world on a sometimes day-to-day basis. A product exists that you enjoyed as a kid, and the next day it doesn't, and then the next day it's back again. Or one day you watch a report and a celebrity has died, and then 2 days later the celebrity's alive again and you can't find the report. There are all kinds of examples of this, and so as you can see, I could go on, but hopefully that is a pretty good overview of
Definitely.
how that time seems to be the core of all these things.
Yeah, that is absolutely fascinating, and it makes a lot of sense whenever you put it into that perspective. And also, based on some of the information I've received from my contact experience, it was almost spot on to what you were saying about time. So that resonates really, really, really strongly with me. I want to get into how that could relate to different types of hauntings, especially the ones that you've dealt with. You hear of poltergeist, having the ability to move objects, or houses that have residual negative energy. I'm wondering, what types you've dealt with, and if you've ever dealt with any of the spirits that actually have consciousness that you can interact with, that seem to be, I guess, a spirit of someone that may still be around.
Yes, and in fact, if I look back at my life, and it's also important to point out that over the years, I would go probably every year to at least between 50 and 100 really haunted places. And so you're talking about not necessarily spending as much time as you might like at a haunted place, but I've been to a lot of places and a lot of different situations. And out of all that, there have only been 3 or 4 times where I've had one of those like big life-altering moments. And the first one, when it comes to ghosts, was the one I told you about. The second one, which happened after that, was when I went to a poltergeist infested house in South Carolina, and for the first time was able to witness objects flying off walls. And the first time I was there was a little decorative dove that was on the wall right in front of me and another researcher, and it just launched off the wall, hit the floor, shattered into pieces. I mean, it was like you could feel this shock wave in the room, and I was so disappointed that I did not get that on camera that I went back there and took a whole army of investigators with me with cameras rolling, and we did capture some poltergeist activity. So we did capture objects being moved. And so there's no doubt about it. I mean, when objects just go flying off a wall or tumble off a chair or something like that, it's really dramatic because there's no real question about what you witnessed, and that's another thing that is valuable about videotaping things. Most of the things that have been really profound that I've seen, I've been able to videotape or take a picture or document it in some way, because if you don't do that, I don't care how amazing your experience is. I think that if it's extraordinary enough, you're liable to turn around, a year later and doubt yourself. But the third big thing, which was, this was the life altering of life altering, because when I saw that mist, as I mentioned, I would certainly define it as a ghost, as an apparition of some kind. You see a misty thing floating around in an attic, you say, okay, I'll call that a ghost. When you see objects flying off the walls, you can say, okay, that's a poltergeist, but you still don't know for sure what's causing it. If you really want to play devil's advocate, you could say, well, maybe there's some mysterious atmospheric phenomenon that creates a mist like this. Or maybe there is some type of electromagnetic geologic burst at some places that makes objects fly around. Like you can try to rationalize it. But this next experience I had, this is the one where I was like, okay, this cannot be rationalized. I'd been doing a lot of TV shows at this point, and I was hired to appear on a TV show as the investigator of a very Francisville, Louisiana. People listening to us probably know about this place. It's called Myrtle's Plantation.
Yes, I've actually been there. I spent the night there myself.
Okay, excellent. Do you remember what room you stayed in?
Oh, I think it was General Beauregard, I believe. I think.
My story happened in the General David Bradford suite. And I don't know how many, there are a lot of rooms, and I'm sure several are named after different generals.
Right, yeah.
But I'll never forget the name General David Bradford. I'd never heard of him before, but I'll never forget that name. So I was hired to go there and spend a couple nights investigating this place with a crew following me around. However, I was scheduled to get there a day before the crew. And so I arrived by myself at I guess it was the Baton Rouge airport. When I got there, it was just a terrible, terrible stormy day. I think there were even some tornadoes around. I mean, it was not a pleasant introduction. I mean, I got in the car and the rain was pounding so hard I could hardly see where I was going. The sun was going down. I almost died on the drive there because a bridge had washed out. And my car was the first car to get to this spot. And so I kind of hydroplaned to a stop. And if I hadn't done that, I would have tumbled off and, who knows, probably drowned in this gushing river. So I had to take a big detour. And so, listen, by the time I got to Myrtle's Plantation, I was never so relieved to be at a famous or infamous haunted place. I got out and, there was a big pack of black cats roving around. I mean, this is like something out of a Stephen King novel at this point. And turns out because they were going to do the TV shoot, they had reserved the whole place. There were no guests. And so when I got there, there was a staff member who said, "Oh, finally, glad you're here," gave me the keys and said, "Have a good night," and left me there, and I had the entire property to myself. I mean, which I thought that was pretty amazing. I mean, I could have stolen every valuable thing out of that house if I wanted to. So here I am left alone in the middle of this storm, which went on all night long, in this big, creepy, famous haunt. And I was very tired, very weary. And so I could have, and so I'll start by telling you, when I went into the bedroom, the General David Bradford suite, it was one of those where you walk inside and there is the big painting on the wall with the eyes that follow you, and the 4-poster Ebenezer Scrooge bed.
Yeah.
The ceiling was 15 feet high. I mean, it was a very dramatic room to be in, and I could have just pretty much settled in, because I went to like a little diner down the road and got some food, and I could have just settled in and gone to bed, but I was like, you know what? I came here to do an investigation. I have this amazing opportunity where I have this whole property to myself. So all the lights were turned out, and any light that I saw that was on, I turned off, and I turned on my camera with the night shot feature. And I walked all over that giant plantation house by myself in the dark. That was pretty damn spooky. But I didn't see anything paranormal. When I got back to my room and closed the door, I had 2 or 3 meters, and one of them was picking up this very pronounced electromagnetic field. And by the way, I make a big deal out of saying that when I use a piece of technology, I understand that technology. A lot of people run around with an EMF meter, and if you say, okay, well, what is an electromagnetic field? They look at you like a deer in headlights. They don't really understand what an electromagnetic field is or how a meter works. And I'm not trying to criticize people who are like that. I'm just saying that when I tell you I'm getting something anomalous on one of these meters, I really know what I'm talking about. And so I was picking up some very strange bursts. Now I realized there was a thunderstorm, there was lightning in the distance that can cause all kinds of interference. I'm being mindful of all this. And as I'm standing there in the dark, all of a sudden I hear boom, boom, which I presumed was on the door. Okay, I almost jumped out of my skin. And this was getting late. This is probably between 10 and 11 o'clock at night. So, of course, I went over, I opened the door. There was nobody there. The rain's still pouring outside. I went over and looked outside. There was no evidence of anybody. There was no car. There was nothing around. So I walked back in. I've got my camera rolling. And boom, boom, boom. There it is again, except now it sounds like it's coming from a different spot on one of the walls of the room. And I said out loud into the darkness, "Is there someone here in this room?" Boom, boom, boom. Now at that point, a chill ran down my spine. And I said, "If there is someone in this room with me, will you please do that again?" Boom, boom, boom. This is when that fight or flight instinct kicks in.
Right.
This is when you really test your salt, there was an overwhelming instinct for me to just turn around and get out of that room. I don't know why that happens, but I felt like I need to be out of this situation for a minute. But I was able to force myself to stay there. And as freaky as this is to be in this situation, I realized, okay, this is what I'm here for. This is what I do. And this began a whole night of interaction with this thing in this room, where I would ask it, okay, knock on that table. Doo, doo, doo. Okay, now knock on this wall. Doo, doo, doo. Okay. It was always in threes. I tried to see if I could communicate with it. I said, like, okay, knock once for yes or twice for no. But it was always three. Do, do, do. I didn't know why that was. Later, I started doing research, and there's one theory out there that sometimes bad spirits, sacrilegious spirits, they knock in threes because it mocks the Holy Trinity. And so I don't know about that, but that makes it even scarier when you
Right,
think,
yeah.
yeah. And in that house that you may have remembered, they have all the keyholes turned upside down
Yes.
because people believed that would confuse ghosts and they couldn't go through doors and all that kind of thing. So this went on for hours, and at this point, there was no doubt in my mind whatsoever that I was communicating with an intelligent, aware, free, unpredictable, disembodied intelligence of some kind. There was no doubt in my mind. And this went on until I was so just dead dog tired because I didn't get much sleep the day before and everything. I finally had to go to bed. And so I was thinking, see, to me, it's one thing to stand in a room when you're kind of prepared and you've got a camera and some meters and document something like this. I don't want to wake up in the middle of the night and have some freaking ghost standing there next to the bed. Like, that's too far. I said, if I wake up and this thing is standing here next to the bed, I'm out of here. That's it. I'm going to go sleep in my car the rest of the night. So I laid down to go to bed. And the last thing I remember was about 8 o'clock in the morning, this thing banged on the headboard of the bed right next to my head. And ironically, as a guy who has spent his life out there trying to see this stuff and document this stuff, it was the only time in my life I ever actually asked a ghost to stop giving me evidence at that point. And that was it. I said, please stop, and then it never happened again. So the next day, the film crew arrived. They came in, I think, from Tennessee. And when they got there, I told them, I said, guys, you're not going to believe the night that I had last night. And I said, oh, we're going to have a hell of a show. Hell of a show. So that night, we had cameras all over to document this. And of course, it was the most peaceful, uneventful night you can possibly imagine, where like nothing happened. And so that said, that was a huge paradigm shift for me, because I could no longer even attempt to rationalize these effects that I'd witnessed, these paranormal effects, as being anything other than some interaction with spirits or another realm. And so anybody who experiences that, I mean, it's like, I know they say you have to see it to believe it for a lot of people. Well, let me tell you, if that happens to you, you don't need anybody else to tell you that ghosts are real. I mean, you know after that.
Oh yeah, I definitely imagine so. Yeah, my visit was pretty peaceful itself. I didn't experience anything much, although it was really nice atmosphere and nice to spend time out there. It did have a kind of eerie vibe at night, and I myself did get access to after hours access with supervision to kind of do my own little investigation, although I'm nowhere near a professional paranormal investigator, but it was fun, and it was a great experience. Earlier you had mentioned demons, and I think that demons are profoundly misunderstood to a lot of people. There's a lot of dogma behind it. I'd like to know, what are your thoughts on demons, and what are they, and can demons possess people? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, that's a great question, because for pretty much the entire first half of my so-called career in the paranormal, I didn't really take the idea of demons seriously. I always rolled my eyes at it, and when people call themselves demonologists, I always, I'm the last person to be calling somebody else nuts, but sometimes I would be like, yeah, these folks are probably just imagining things, and like you said, They have this dogmatic baggage and that's sort of attached to it. But then the more I was exposed to the paranormal, and the more my mind opened, and the more I started looking at things from different points of view, the more I began to understand what I think a demon is in terms that make sense to me. I think it's the reason that we roll our eyes is because often when we talk about demons, we think of some kind of cartoonish caricature of, you know, some little gargoyle with horns that's going to jump on top of you and eat your throat out or something. And what I found is that, okay, starting with the experience I just described, I have no doubt that there are invisible forms of life out there. And now, that thing that was knocking on the wall, I don't know if that was the spirit of a person who used to reside there. I mean, it'd be easy for me to say, well, this was one of the slaves, or this was one of the slave masters, or, you know, you can let your imagination run wild. Or that could have been some type of a spirit that never even inhabited a human form. Because one of my books is about non-human apparitions. It's got a very cute name. It's called Pet Ghost, Animal Encounters from Beyond the Grave, because the publisher thought it would sell better if we talked more about pets. But it's not just about the spirits of dogs and cats and hamsters and stuff like that. It's about non-human apparitions, including dinosaur ghosts and insect ghosts, and then even things that may be interdimensional, Mothman. My point is, I started researching the concept that there is nothing within scientific understanding that dismisses the possibility of life existing at frequencies that are non-physical to you and me. So that is to say that physicality itself is a very relative thing. One thing is physical to another thing if they both resonate within a certain frequency range. So like right now, I can reach out and touch the wall, and the wall is physical to me. I can't pass my hand through that wall, and that's because we are similar enough that we resist each other. However, as I'm speaking to you right now, there are radio waves that are passing through me. They're all over the place, and I can't. However, if I were made of radio waves, then those radio waves would be like walls to me, and I couldn't pass through them. So there's no reason to think that there aren't other forms of life out there. And if there are other forms of life out there that are usually non-physical to us, well, what do they eat? What do they feed upon? Everything has got to have energy from somewhere. And maybe humans are pretty crude beings, because in order for us to get energy, well, we have to put something in our mouths and chew it up and swallow it, and then, you know, and it's just like, it's a big pain to have to do that. Maybe some of these other beings are so evolved that they can kind of skip that whole chewing and ingestion and drinking process, and they can just latch onto you and directly feed on your energy. Like a parasite. It's like an invisible parasite that latches on. And these beings, because they are parasites, may be of a lower frequency, and so they are evil to us because that they are harmful to us. I mean, you could say, for example, like, is a mosquito evil? No, I don't think a mosquito is inherently evil. It's just a creature that was born with this unfortunate desire to suck my blood. And so it's easy for me to say, oh, that mosquito is evil because it wants my blood. And so these beings may not be inherently evil, so to speak, but they are evil to us in terms of the human experience, because some of these beings may latch on to a person and feed on that person's energy. And because it's an invisible being, the person is unaware of it and doesn't take it seriously. And the toll becomes a gradual toll. It starts with the person becoming very unhealthy, restless, not able to get a lot of sleep. The person becomes irritable. The person becomes depressed. The person becomes suicidal. And eventually, if something is not done to get rid of this parasite, then the parasite will kill the person, just like all parasites ultimately do, and then move on to another victim. And so it seems to me that if we accept the premise that there are other invisible beings out there, some of them, the ones that want to feed upon us and treat us like, cattle, are the ones that we historically think of as being demonic. And there are other beings, however, that may have an interest in our success. We give them something valuable by living, by not dying. Maybe they are able to take advantage of our energy in the same way that demons are, but in a way that does not destroy us. So, for example, if you're a fisherman and you live off of a supply of fish, well, the dumbest thing you can do is go out and fish all the fish, because once they're gone, now you got no fish anymore. So that is the sort of the brute, primitive way of going out there and collecting your food, because you're not thinking ahead, you're not being wise, you're not being strategic. On the other hand, if you're smart, you say, okay, I get to feed on fish as long as I leave a certain population of fish there to keep ensuring there are more fish. It's a better long-term goal. And so these beings that we think of as angelic, that sort of help us in times of need, that whether it's whispering something in your ear or holding you back in a car crash or whatever they do, these may be beings that are there to try to keep us intact because they are getting something else out of us, when the beings that we call demonic are the ones that are just there for a quick meal and have no interest in our long-term success and survival.
Very well said. And as far as you said, you might have these attachments, these things that might attach to you. Have you experienced working in the paranormal field for so long that you may have had anything attached to you that you might have had to, get rid of yourself?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's kind of common, actually. I have been in some pretty dark situations where I investigated, and the woman, actually, well, there are two or three that are coming to mind. Well, the first one I'll tell you about is the woman there. She said, look, the area where she was at was a big rural area, and she owned an animal rescue. So she had all kinds of horses and cows, and you name it. She had all kinds of things on this farm, and her name was Lynn Jackson. She doesn't mind me using her name, and so she contacted me and said that her property was haunted. It had a history of violence, and that bad things were happening like consistently. Healthy animals dropping dead. People who would visit there would get really sick. Fires would just start. Like, she had an investigator come out before I came in, and before the investigator left, suddenly the car, underneath the hood, the car burst into flames. There was like a big long list. Like, this is like some kind of Amityville horror stuff. So nowadays, to be honest with you, I don't even know if I would go and investigate a place like that. But when I was younger, I wanted to see, is this stuff real? Is there anything to this? And so we went down and did an investigation or two at her house. And we did document a lot of very strange stuff. While we were there, though, most of it was, just capturing truly paranormal orbs. And of course, that's a big distinction. There's a big difference between an orb and a truly paranormal orb. We did see some objects move. We had all that kind of typical stuff. But the first night I got back from her house, I was in my office, and this was like 5 o'clock in the morning. And I had the door closed. My wife, I mean, this is my home office, and so my wife was asleep on the other side of the house. And as I'm working, all of a sudden, on this peaceful, morning, the door to my office just flew open, just like somebody kicked it in. Scared the heck out of me. As soon as the door flew open, all the paper that I had on my desk just went flying all over the place, and my boombox turned on full volume. Now, can you imagine all that happening at the same moment when you're sitting there working on something?
That's insane.
Yeah. And so the first thing that I did was try to turn off the boombox, because like I say, my wife was sleeping, and so it was right next to me. So I kind of rush over to it, and it wasn't plugged in. And so then I opened the back. There were no batteries in it. Now, I know enough about electronics to realize that a capacitor or a condenser can get charged and hold a little bit of charge, but not like this. So it kept blasting, and I could not figure out how to. So I just finally turned the volume down. It didn't turn off. It just kept blasting. And then I realized I got bigger fish to fry here, because I got up and I turned around, and I did not see anything in that doorway with my physical eyes. And this is a very strange way of putting it, and some people are probably going to understand what I mean. My physical eyes did not see anything, but I got this mental image of some type of a large dark blue form standing there. And I hear people talk about the third eye, this spot in the head that may be able to see things in a more direct, energetic path. I don't know how to explain what happened, but I just knew, I could feel there was something standing there. And I just became filled with rage. And I started screaming at it and cursing at it and saying, "This is my house, and you get out of here. I don't know what it is." And then it left. And it was just like, whew, all the tension was gone from the room. And I was really rattled. I couldn't go to sleep the rest of the night. 2 days later, one of the female investigators that had been with us, a woman who was in her early 40s, she contacted some good friends and told him that she was really scared because there was some type of a big dark form that had been coming into her house. And he was on the phone with her for about an hour, and he knew that I had had a strange experience at my house. And so he mentioned to her something along the lines of, yeah, something must have followed us. But he kind of calmed her down and said that, I'll talk to you tomorrow. And the next day, she was dead.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, she was dead. The last conversation she had was that conversation with him. His name was Brian Irish. And the thing is, the circumstances of her death are something that I really don't feel comfortable talking about publicly, but what I will tell you is that there were signs of some kind of violent trauma, but no explanation for what happened. And that is an absolutely true story. I'll put my hand on a stack of Bibles, and there are a lot of people who know the details. But again, this is a real person who died with a real family, and I don't want to get into any more details than that.
Right.
Now, on other occasions, I had an attachment that was causing a lot of unfortunate stuff at my house. And one morning, actually, this is one early afternoon, I'd been up late, I was sleeping, and my wife was lying next to me wearing headphones, watching television, so she wouldn't disturb me while I was sleeping. And I heard this weird little, like, crinkling noise that woke me up, and I couldn't figure out what it was. And so then I just rolled over, went back to sleep, and a voice, this is the only time in my life I've ever heard a voice, a voice said, it was kind of a, it was more masculine than feminine, but the voice said, "There is a snake over there." And I opened my eyes, and there was this 6-foot long black snake that had slithered up onto my side of the bed and was about 6 inches away from my face.
Wow.
And I don't know if you've ever seen a person go from a lying down position to standing straight up instantaneously, but it happened. And as soon as I sprang up, of course, my wife turns, she sees this snake, she starts flipping out. The snake instantly realizes this is a bad situation. The snake is vicious. It's just striking at me and hissing. I mean, it was really ticked off. I wrestled with this snake. I was trying to catch it, okay, which I know that's probably not what a lot of people would do, but I grew up in the woods, and I kind of knew how to grab a snake, but not like I enjoyed this situation at all. But I finally was able to get a hold of this snake and throw it in a garbage bag, and I took it outside and disposed of it. And then when I got back into the house, here I am trembling with adrenaline. My hands are all stinky because it smells like this snake. And I go to the bathroom to wash my hands, and my wife shrieks and says, "Oh my God, there's another one." I go back, and here we are. Here's a snake number 2. Back to square one, wrestle this thing. Oh my God. That was like the final straw. And that's when I really started saying, okay, there's something negative that is attached to me, because this was like the climax of a series of bad things. And at that point, I started taking measures to start cleansing my entire environment. And there is a process you can go through to help sort of remove some of these attachments, because if you get something negative attached to you, it's almost like a beacon goes out and it starts signaling to all these other sort of dark, nasty things that, you're weak prey, so let's get them. And so, again, I could go on with a lot of different examples of this, but yes, I definitely have to pause once in a while in my life and sort of clean it up a little bit, because nowadays, like, I don't even bring stuff into my home or anything like that I think may have negative energy. I owned a museum, and people would say, "Here are some knives that were used to murder some people. This would be great for the museum." And I'd say, "No, I don't want that kind of stuff in the museum." I live here in Las Vegas, Nevada now, and I've been on ghost adventures many times, and Zach Bagans has his haunted museum here, and you go in there and it's just like full of serial killer stuff and human body parts, and it works for him, I guess, but I wouldn't have all that stuff around me. I try to avoid that negative energy these days.
Right, definitely. Now, as far as your haunted museum, I know that, certain objects can carry certain energies with them, or even bring entities. What about the objects that you have in your museum? What kind of stuff do you have there?
Well, my museum earlier this year had to close down. The museum was in the basement of the Asheville Masonic Temple, and that's an old building. It's a grand building, but an old building that's been in some great disrepair for a long time. Asheville gets a lot of rain, and we got to the point where we started having frequent flooding issues in the basement. And even though it was like a spooky old dungeon there and everybody loved it, I was gradually losing some of my stuff. And finally, the board there said, we need to go in and just totally renovate that entire basement, because this is a big, tall, heavy building. And if that basement, starts to collapse, then, the whole thing's going to come tumbling down. So it was time for me to move my collection out. And I could have kept it somewhere in Asheville, but now that I live here in Las Vegas, I have a show here called the Creepy Vegas Ghost and UFO Show. I'm also planning to open up some type of a showcase here to show some of my collection. So I just shipped everything out here to Vegas. So anyway, that said, among the things that I have, the one that I really cherish the most. And I have a lot of cool stuff. I mean, I went to Romania and Transylvania and got all this Dracula, Vlad the Impaler stuff that's authentic. And I've got, a chupacabra skull from Puerto Rico and a crystal skull. And I have all kinds of stuff, cursed little dolls. But my favorite thing is actually standing in my house right now. And it's I love having him here so much. I'm not sure if I'm going to to ever put him back in a public place. I don't know. But here's the story. So most of your listeners are probably familiar with Art Bell, who was the creator and the original host of the Coast to Coast AM radio program.
Yeah, one of my influences.
Good. He's, mine too. I think all of us owe a great debt to Art for showing us how to talk about all this stuff on radio. Yeah. So Art, he started interviewing me, 20 years ago, I guess, and that was a big honor. And then, of course, when he retired, George took over. And so George and I, over these years, have done, multiple TV shows, live events. I've been a correspondent for Coast to Coast AM. I'm a regular guest. I mean, I know him and Tom Danheiser as producer very well. And so I've always been, I've just always felt very, very close to that program. And I'm really grateful to have had a long relationship with that show. And in, I'm going to say 2009 or 2010, I was near San Francisco, actually. As a matter of fact, I was filming an episode of Ghost Adventures at the Winchester Mystery House. And I had a packed schedule. At that time, I lived in North Carolina. And from North Carolina, by the way, I lived in the Bermuda Triangle for about 5 or 6 years, and I just moved out here to Vegas about 3 years ago. But anyway, so I'd flown from North Carolina to California, and then as soon as that shoot was done, I had to fly from California to Michigan to speak. I had a pretty tight, packed schedule. So you can imagine my surprise when in the midst of this, I got a call from a good friend of mine who is also a business associate named Mobius. And he said, Josh, you're not going to believe this. Okay, I'm on the phone with him, literally being driven to the TV set. So I have a lot on my mind. So I'm thinking, this better be good. He said, I just got off the phone with Art Bell. And he said, Art has an alien that he needs to get rid of ASAP. I said, what the hell are you talking about? He told me that Art had a 4 or 5 foot tall wooden alien statue in his house that was coming to life at night, according to his wife and daughter, and scaring the bejesus out of them. And it had gotten so bad that he said, this thing is going to have to go in the trash unless somebody else wants it, because he said, I love it and I don't want it to go. But this is not a joke. My wife and daughter, they are scared to death of this thing. And so Mobius says, do you want it? I said, yeah, of course I want it. And he said, well, Art says you got to drive to his house right now, and get it. And I said, that's impossible. And Mobius is like, well, yeah, look, you got to do this. He's going to give it to somebody else, or he's going to trash it. And the thing is, this is one of my biggest regrets in life. I had this invitation to go to Art Bell's house and get this alien, but because of my obligations, it was impossible for me to do it. However, I called a good friend of mine who is a producer-director named Jim Castle, who lived in Los Angeles, which is, just like a 3 or 4 hour drive from Pahrump, Nevada, where Art lived. And Jim was a big Coast to Coast AM fan. And so I told Jim the situation, and he said he would go and get it. So Jim and one of his friends drove to Art's house Art was just the most gracious host, invited them inside, gave them a big tour of his property and everything. Um, Art got down on his hands and knees at my request and signed the base of the statue as he was being photographed.
Oh, nice.
He also wrote a big handwritten letter about the provenance of this statue. As it turns out, this statue was given to him by Rush Limbaugh. There's a whole weird story behind this statue. I recently wrote the whole story down on a webpage for historic posterity. If anybody's interested, if you go to artbellalien.com, you can see pictures of this thing, and you can read the whole story of how this ended up being created and why Rush had it and why that Rush gave it to Art and now how Art gave it to me. So anyway, I would have given anything. If I had a time machine, Chris, I'd love to go back and figure out some way I could have gone to Art's house and gotten that thing. Of course, Art is dead now. He passed away a few years ago. So anyway, I got this thing, and I thought, man, this is just perfect for my museum. So when I got back to Asheville, here I had this gigantic box, FedExed, full of foam peanuts, and cracked it open, and here I have this weird, mysterious alien statue. And so I thought, man, I'm going to make a big deal out of this. I'm going to highly promote this and tout this and get a lot of media coverage. And so I spent that whole first day building a really nice special display for this statue in the prime corner of the museum. So I had like all these pictures blown up and all these plaques that had, the history of stuff and, Art's handwritten letter there. And it was just great. And I had all the lighting adjusted just perfect because I contacted the local news stations and they were going to come, like the local ABC affiliate. They were going to come the next day. So I was there till about 11 o'clock at night, just making sure this thing was just positioned exactly as I wanted it. I was the last one to leave the building, locked everything up, turned on the security. The next morning, I came in by myself. I was the first person back into the building. I walked in. I walk over to the room where the alien is standing. They call him Carvel. It's a long story. You'll have to read it at artbellalien.com to figure out why. I look over at the alien statue, and I was instantly ticked because this entire, 4 or 5 foot tall, 100-pound statue had shifted, I think something like 25 or 30 degrees to the right. And I thought, somebody is messing with me. Somebody came in here and moved this thing after I put all this work into getting it how I wanted it. I went back and I checked. I had security camera footage of the doorway. There was only one way in and out of that building. It was an old jail building at that time because we moved it later to the Masonic Temple. And nobody came into that building after me. I was the last one to leave the night before. I was the first one in the next day. Nothing else in the entire place was disturbed, and yet somehow this statue had moved in the middle of the night. And I couldn't believe it. Could not believe this had happened. And so I started telling everybody, the story, and I got a 24-hour-a-day camera and put on him and never captured him moving again. Now, there were plenty of occasions, thousands of people came to the museum and saw Carvel, had their picture taken with him. Sometimes people would tell me that they thought they saw him move or wink or something like that. But when it finally came time for me to move him from the museum, again, this was just earlier this year, it was months ago, I had him shipped out here to Vegas, and I put everything else from my museum in storage for the time being except for him. And he is now standing in the corner of my living room, and I am waiting to wake up in the middle of the night and see him running around the house. That hasn't happened yet, but I have a feeling someday it will.
Man, that's awesome. Yeah. So that's the only instance you've really seen of Carvel move around?
Yeah, personally it is. Now, of course, I went to Key West, Florida, and did a big story about Robert the Haunted Doll. I even wrote a book about it called Don't Play with Robert, the World's Most Haunted Doll. It's actually more of a booklet. It's very short. If you go to joshuapwarren.com and click the link to the Curiosity Shop, you can even download it as a PDF. And the story behind Robert that's quite a long, dramatic story. But he's a big doll, about 3 feet tall. He's well over 100 years old. Another one of those little collectibles that's had a heck of a dramatic history, passing hands. And he is said to come to life and run around, and has even been accused of attacking people. I mean, there are many who claim that Chucky was based, the screenwriter who wrote Chucky based some of it on Robert the Haunted Doll. And so I remember one time when I was down there in Key West, the staff said there was I think a hurricane that, speaking of museums getting flooded, a hurricane had really flooded the museum that he is now in. It's the Fort East Martello Museum. And so when the water subsided enough for the staff to go back in, they were just sickened when they walked in the door, and saw the damage that was done to so many of these artifacts. And they looked over to the rocking chair where Robert sits, and he was gone. And so they were just, everybody gets infatuated with this doll. They get obsessed with him, and they were just horrified that he was gone. Where did he go? And then somebody looked up and noticed that he was up in the rafters, dry as a bone. So Robert the Haunted Doll is, the story is, you could make a movie. Actually, there was a movie made based upon Robert the Haunted Doll, but you could make a very factual movie about his case. When I was there investigating Robert the Haunted Doll, knowing all these stories and having talked face to face with eyewitnesses who had seen him move, and a couple of them were lawyers, and you're talking about some credible people, people who are professionals who might not usually want to go out and say they've seen a doll come to life, who will look you in the eye and tell you this stuff and let you use their name and everything. And when I went there to see Robert the doll, the thing with Robert is you have to ask his permission before you photograph him. If you don't do that, you'll have bad luck. A whole series of unfortunate events will fall upon your shoulders. And so I didn't take any chances, and I did ask for his permission. But when I first got there to see him, there was nobody else around other than the lady at the front desk. And she goes, "Oh, you're here to see Robert? He's that way." And she points me toward this doorway into an adjacent room. And as I sort of sheepishly walked into this room, I could see Robert sitting there on his throne, and he is under glass. They actually ended up removing the glass from him for me during my investigation so that I could do some tests on him. But when I first saw him, he was under glass, and when I saw this doll, and it was just the two of us, to me, it looked like he had a frown on his face, like a pretty bitter, unpleasant expression on this doll's face. And he's got these coal black eyes, and his face is kind of aged and pockmarked and sort of, it's decayed a little bit. And so I stood there and I said, "Robert, my name is Joshua Warren, and I have come here from a long way to respectfully study you and learn about you. And I have millions of people." This was a report I was doing for Coast to Coast AM. I said, "I have millions of people out there who are interested in you and your story, and I only want to educate them and tell them more about you and your story. And so I hope that you will grant me permission to photograph you and to study you." And I stood there for a moment, and I could swear that that expression, that nasty little bitter expression he had on his face, relaxed and turned into a smile. Now, maybe that was just my imagination playing with me, but I got to tell you, man, it was like, and I wondered, I thought to myself at first, I had no reason to believe that anybody at that museum was trying to trick people, like, installed a little animatronic motor in this thing or something like that. I mean, I considered that could be a possibility. Of course, I studied him and I found that was not the case at all. But my point is, what I saw was a far cry from him getting up and attacking people and climbing into the rafters. But I did have the distinctive impression that, his expression changed a little bit. So, I used to think, again, this kind of stuff is silly, that inanimate objects could come to life. But then the more I studied it, the more I thought, we don't even understand the true nature of the mind-body relationship. How it is that this invisible thing called the mind is able to animate this physical, clunky thing called the human body. We don't see where that connection is. And so if we can't even explain how the mind animates this body, which is destined for decay, then why should we be so closed to the possibility that consciousness might be able to enter and animate other forms of matter that are not necessarily built as complex as you and I are, but still, the fundamental concept here is that it might be that objects can possess what we think of as spiritual energy, and that sometimes that spiritual energy is kinetic and can cause some degree of movement and lifelike behavior in these dolls and similar things.
That's absolutely fascinating. Man, we have a few minutes left. The last thing that I want to talk about is one of the most fascinating things that I find on your website. It is the wishing machines and the accounts of people that have had such success with these, including yourself. I'd like you to talk about those wishing machines. For those of the audience that have no idea what this is, tell us what a wishing machine is and some of the great things that it's actually done for people.
Well, this is one of my favorite topics because it sounds so unbelievable. And I, being a gadget guy, I just love to try testing out anything that's got knobs and switches and plugs, and I just love that. I had a laboratory, and I have another one now that I'm building. It's kind of like Dr. Frankenstein's lair, and so sometimes throughout my history, if I see some machine that somebody says does something incredible, my thought is, okay, even if it doesn't work, and my wife and I, we chose not to have kids,
Josh,
so that we would have a lot more money to.
You were breaking up for a minute there, about 30 seconds.
Oh, okay. What was the last thing you heard me say?
You were just starting to talk about the wishing machines. You were talking about something about you and your wife, and then you started to break it up.
Yeah, so do I sound okay now?
Sounds good now.
Okay, good. So yeah, my wife and I chose not to have kids so that we would have extra money that we could spend on like stupid stuff. And so that's why sometimes I'll buy some weirdo machine, whether or not I think it may actually work. And when I was a teenager, I started learning about these devices known as radionic machines, psionic machines. These are devices that are basically a box. They have an input plate and an output plate and a number of knobs on them with a very special circuit inside. And the idea is that you take something you want to manifest and you put it on the input plate. So let's say, for example, I want a new car. Well, maybe I'll take a picture of that car and I'll take a picture of myself and I put them on the input plate. And then I adjust the dials. There's a certain simple way you tune the machine. And then you move your picture from the input plate to the output plate, and now you are transmitting the energy of that car through this box to you. Okay, that's sort of the theory. And again, it sounds like quackery, but I thought, you know what, that's interesting to me. I'm going to try it out. And this really falls right in line with a lot of my work in the paranormal in general, because what we're really talking about here is how things are able to manifest. And manifesting doesn't always have to be something creepy, like a ghost has manifest here or a UFO has materialized. Manifestation is the basic process of using your mind in order to shape physical reality. Again, it goes back to that mind-body-environment connection. So wishing machines at that time were very, very difficult to find. And I found a guy who made some in California. And one of the reasons it used to be really hard to get this technology is because starting in the 1920s and going up through the 1950s, people in the United States in particular were thrown in prison for making this kind of stuff, selling this kind of stuff. They were burning their books. The FDA was banning their books and burning their books. So, I mean, there was a lot of very serious stigma attached to this. And the easy reason is to say, well, this is just because it doesn't work. But on the other hand, a lot of people said it does work, and that the problem is we can't understand how it works. It was invented by a medical doctor, a very highly esteemed doctor named Albert Abrams, and he was using it to supposedly cure people of cancer and claiming great success. But when they asked him, well, how does it work? He couldn't explain it scientifically, and well, that's a big no-no. So anyway, my point is, it had been so banned and so taboo for so long, it was hard to find them. I found this guy who made one, and I bought it for $300. And so when it arrived, it was a handsome looking box, and I was happy to have it, if again, for no other reason than to have a novelty. And I thought I'd be Mr. Clever, and I figured, well, I'm going to wish for my first wish to have my $300 back. So that's what I did. I wished for my $300 back, and I set it up. And just 2 or 3 days later, I got a call out of the blue from a big resort in my neck of the woods called the Grove Park Inn, and they told me they had a group of dentists coming into town for a conference, and they wanted somebody local to stand up for about 45 minutes and tell some stories about the history in the area, and they were paying $300 and offered it to me. And I thought, well, isn't that interesting that that's the exact amount of money that I had on this machine, right? So after that, I started taking it a little more seriously and started experimenting. And what I found was every time I put something on the machine, it would actually come true. It didn't always happen the way you would expect, though. It's not like you're going to put the wish on there and all of a sudden the leprechaun's going to appear and go poof. You know, it's like if you wish for a car, it's not like you're going to walk outside 10 minutes later and, you know, it's going to be in your driveway. What you find is that when you put the wish there and you leave it there for a little while, which it could be days or weeks or, you know, even months, depending on the magnitude of what you're trying to accomplish, how many moving parts are working in the environment to manifest this for you. I mean, it's a lot easier to make a TV show than a movie, you know, that kind of thing, because there are more people involved, so it takes longer. But I started realizing that if I put something there that I wanted to manifest, that circumstances would happen that would bring that thing into my life. So if I wished for the car, suddenly an opportunity would open up for me to either get the car or get the money to have the car. And this got very, very specific. I started using I bought 2 or 3 of them because you can only use them for one wish at a time. I started using them on a daily basis, and I'll give you some stories about what happened to me. For one thing, I was living in North Carolina when there was a bad winter, bad blizzard, lots of snow on the ground. The power was out for like over a week. I wasn't prepared. And I said, you know what? I think I'm sick of spending these winters here in the mountains. I'd like to go somewhere tropical. And so I took a picture of a tropical beach. You know, I just did a search on, you know, Google or whatever for tropical beach. Just found a picture I liked, cut it out, put it on the machine, tuned the machine, left it. Well, less than a week after that, I got contacted by a man in Puerto Rico who said that he had paranormal phenomena at his house and wanted to hire me to come down to his house in Puerto Rico, where it's basically summer year-round, to stay with him for a while and study this activity. And I said, I'm there. You don't have to twist my arm. So
Yeah.
he flew me down there. While I was there, and the stuff I documented there was pretty darn bizarre. That's for another episode or another edition of your podcast, I guess. I ended up meeting a realtor. And the realtor took me to a condo, and it was right on the beach, and it was 2-story, and I just fell in love with it. And I said, okay, I'll take it. I'll take it. So I flew back to North Carolina. I told my wife, quit your job. We're moving to Puerto Rico. And so I looked at that wishing machine. I said, man, that thing really, really worked. And then I got curious, and I found that picture that I'd put on the machine. Turns out that picture was a picture of the Boquerón Beach. And the beach right in front of my condo there was the Boquerón Beach.
That's amazing. Wow.
Now, I could have picked a picture, a tropical picture from any place in the world. I didn't even know what I had chosen. And yet, that didn't matter. That machine somehow facilitated me going to that spot on planet Earth where I lived for the next 5 or 6 years. I'll tell you another story. While I was in Puerto Rico, I was at this point, I teamed up with a guy. I was so impressed with these machines. I teamed up with a man who makes them in South Carolina. And he likes his privacy. He's an engineer. He goes by the name Dr. Mulder. But you know, his real name is Brad. And but he's a great engineer, and he makes these machines. He's the best in the world, no doubt about it. Okay, he's the best wishing machine maker in the world. I teamed up with him. I said, you know what? I have all these people who've heard me talk about my experiences with the wishing machine. I said, if you want me to start educating people, and we can put them on my website, we can sell them, but we need to keep up with people and see what happens to them. See what their success stories are. Like, how does this thing work? In other words, like you can't take this and put it under a microscope or in a laboratory where you're going to have the same consistent, reference points for everybody. We need to sort of like take surveys of people and figure out what they wish for, how did they wish for it, how long did it take, all this kind of stuff. So we created what we call the Wishing Machine Project, where people who are interested could buy these things, and then we would keep up with them. One of the guys who bought one of these machines was in Canada, and he contacted me through email while I was in Puerto Rico, and he told me that he liked to go out and metal detect in his spare time. And so he said he'd never found something that was made of gold with diamonds. And so he thought, well, let's test it out. So he got his machine and he wrote down, I want to find something gold with diamonds. I don't know if he put a picture or what all he did, and tuned it. And he was going to go metal detecting a few days later. Turns out his plans changed and he wasn't able to go metal detecting. But he was walking down the street and he looks down and something catches his eye, and it is a gold bracelet with diamonds. So I thought, well, I'm going to try that out. I've never tried that. I'm always thinking of new things to try. So I went to my machine and I put in there, I want to find something gold with diamonds. Set it aside, forgot about it. 6 days later, my younger sister, Jessica, came down to visit us. She'd never been to Puerto Rico. And one of my favorite places in Puerto Rico is a spot they call Gilligan's Island. You take a little boat over there. There's nothing commercial on it. It's a deserted island, not very big. But it's surrounded by just the most crystal clear, kind of turquoise, warm, beautiful water. and I love to snorkel and all that kind of stuff. And so it's kind of like a giant natural swimming pool, the kind of place where you'd shoot a Corona beer commercial. And so we got there on a Monday, and it was just my wife, my sister, and myself. And because it was a Monday, there was I don't think, we may have seen 2 or 3 other people there, but we kind of had this whole island to ourselves. So at one point, I went out into the water and I sat down on the floor of the sea with the water, the nice warm water up to my neck. It was so relaxing. And my wife is really into seashells. So sometimes when I'm in a situation like that, I'll just sort of feel around in the sand and see if I can pluck up a nice seashell or something for her collection. So she came over and she sat down next to me. So we're both sitting there, and I'm kind of like, again, running my fingers through the sand. And I was like, what is that? And I raise up my hand, and I plucked from the sand a beautiful men's 14-karat gold ring with 9 diamonds in it.
Oh, man.
Looks like it just came straight from the jewelry store. My wife sees this, and she goes, "Are you blanking kidding me?" I slipped it on my ring finger, and it fit perfectly. Now, I don't know how long that ring has been there, but never in my life have I ever found anything like that. And I was always doing that sort of stuff in Puerto Rico and visiting the same places, never had anything like that happen. And then then the light bulb went off, and I was like, oh my God, that's what I put on the wishing machine. And I still wear that ring sometimes when I go to the casino as a little lucky charm.
Yeah.
And over the years, Dr. Mulder and I have shipped thousands and thousands of these machines to people all over the world, every culture, every background, and every single day I get unbelievable, astounding stories from people telling me about the things they have manifest. I got one just yesterday from a woman who said that she had been trying to get a car, and for 9 years there'd been some kind of illegal obstacle. For 9 years. She got her machine. 3 days later, she was sitting in the driver's seat of her brand new Volvo. And I mean, I'm telling you, it's just like, it's unbelievable, the stories. And I have a podcast, and you can find it through my website, joshuapwarren.com. And on my podcast, I frequently read these testimonials from people, because there are many different ways you can manifest stuff. And if you go to the Curiosity Shop on my website, you'll see all these different kinds of tools like wands and miraculous prayer boards and all these different things that you can kind of look at and experiment with. But the wishing machines are the ones that really provide these sort of mind-boggling fast results. And so for anybody listening, if you want some free educational material, I mean free videos, free audio, free testimonials, frequently asked questions, if you want to look at all this and see if it's something that you want to experiment with yourself, go to wishingmachineproject.com, wishingmachineproject.com. You'll find all that free stuff. And even if you decide not to get one of these, just by reading the information, it may open your mind and make you think a little bit differently about what humans are capable of manifesting in a truly magical way if you just have a tool there to help you condense your thoughts properly.
Very cool. Yeah, man, I'm interested in one myself. I might be picking one up myself in the near future. It's very provocative, and I'd love to experiment it with that one for myself.
Well, you know what? I use them every day for everything you can imagine, and I not only use them, however, for good things like projects or money or various types of success. People use them to improve relationships. They use them for everything, but I have used them to successfully create paranormal phenomena. I use them to create a ghost materializing over, a UFO materializing over a crowd of people at a big conference. I used it to assist in materializing a UFO that we captured on camera in Puerto Rico. at a specific spot during a specific period of time. Used it to manifest a ghost in Romania on the trip out there. I mean, frequently I will employ these machines for creating anything that you want, whether it's something that just improves your life or something that you want to see more often because you're a researcher and you're studying something that's rare. I mean, we don't even know what the limits are. You have to wish for things that are naturally possible. Like, you can't wish to live forever like a vampire, or to fly like Superman, or something that is not possible. Right. But if it's possible, then you can make it happen if you properly use one of these machines.
Man, that is fascinating. And Joshua, thank you so much for coming on tonight. There's so much more that we could talk about. I'd love to have you back on sometime in the near future.
I'd be happy to join you again. And hey, you've got a wonderful show. So thank you so much for having me on, Chris. And I look forward to next time.
All right. You have an excellent evening.
You too, my friend.